Let's talk about one big change which makes staying here easier. Hi, I'm Jim Hacking, immigration lawyer practicing law throughout the United States at our offices in St. Louis, San Diego, and Washington, D.C. Today we're going to talk about a huge change that's going to make it a lot harder to deport people, which means it's going to make it a lot easier for immigrants to stay in the United States. First, a little bit of background. You need to remember that there hasn't been any kind of comprehensive immigration reform in nearly 30 years. Congress does not act. Congress is stalemated. The Republicans and the Democrats can't get their acts together to get any kind of meaningful immigration reform passed. So this means that who sits in the White House is all that more important. What do I mean by that? Well, of course, Congress writes the laws, and the president and the executive branch interpret and enforce the laws. Now, I'm not talking about the way that the courts interpret the law. I'm talking about what they choose to enforce, what they choose to make a priority, and how they read the law. So, for example, when Barack Obama was our president, he tried to interpret the immigration laws in a way that was as pro-immigrant as possible. He tried to have his agencies enforce the immigration laws in a way that were pro-immigrant. Then, of course, after that, we had one of the most anti-immigrant presidents of all time, Donald J. Trump. President Trump and his team worked every single day to make life harder for immigrants. And one of those ways that they did that was to interpret the laws to allow them to deport as many people as possible and to keep people from coming to the United States. Now we have President Joe Biden and the team at Homeland Security and USCIS who are trying to interpret the law and to enforce the law in a way that leans more towards immigrants. So I think you can see why it's so important who is president and, of course, who they appoint to head the departments that interpret immigration laws, rules, like the State Department and USCIS. Right now we have Alejandro Mayorkas, who used to head USCIS, and Jadu, who now heads USCIS, as the chief people interpreting our immigration laws. But we also have the Immigration Court. The Immigration Court was separated out from USCIS after 9/11, and the Immigration Court, of course, is the part of the Department of Justice that's charged with deporting immigrants from the United States. And this is where it's really important to pay attention. You might not see these changes day to day, but we caught one recently, and we wanted to talk to you about it in this video. So for 4 years, we had President Trump and Jeff Sessions and all the people they had working at immigration trying to screw the immigrants. Now we have the Biden team trying to help the immigrants. Well, one of the things that the Trump team did is they said to the immigration courts, hey, immigration judges, your job is to deport as many people as possible. And one of the tools we're going to give you to do that is we're going to change the way that you operate. Specifically, we're going to allow you to deport people even when they have an immigration benefit that's available to them over in that other agency, over in USCIS. In other words, we don't want you to wait any longer for USCIS to issue a decision. So we're going to try to speed up the deportation courts. We're going to try to consolidate the dockets and move as many cases as possible. And we're not going to wait for a benefit that may or may not come over at that other agency, that other part of immigration, the quote-unquote nice part of immigration, which is USCIS. So let's talk about a hypothetical. Let's say that there's someone who's placed into removal because their asylum application was denied. But in the interim, they have married someone and they have an I-130 pending. So they're trying to establish that they're married to a U.S. citizen. Well, if you're in removal after the denial of that asylum case, the immigration judges under President Trump were told, hey, don't wait for them, deport them. Don't wait, deport. And so the big change that we're sort of bringing to your attention in this video is that the immigration judge issued an order, the chief immigration judge issued an order just a few months ago that's just sort of coming to light because it hasn't been released to the public. But there has been a fundamental change in the way that they answer that question. For now, the immigration courts are directed to not only look at cases in front of them at the moment in which there might be some discretionary benefit available, that, in other words, that the immigrant or their lawyer brings to the attention of the judge, but they also directed the courts and the court staff to look for cases in which there are pending applications or there could be pending applications that would allow the person to stay in the United States. So the race is over for now. Now that Donald Trump's team is gone and Biden's team is in, the judges are supposed to wait and to terminate the deportation proceedings, to stop deportation while USCIS adjudicates these outside relief forms that would allow the person to stay in the United States. This is a huge deal. It's a huge deal because now immigrants are going to be able to have their cases heard. They're going to be able to operate these cases in a timely fashion, and they're not going to be in a race with the immigration judge who's just trying to deport. It's really an exciting time. So if people are in removal, the immigration courts have been notifying them that, hey, we see that you have this other form of relief, and we see that you have an application pending or could file an application. We're going to go ahead and stop this deportation. It's almost like going back in time and making the deportation go away. As I mentioned, this order has not been made completely public. The immigration organization that I'm a member of, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, has gotten a copy of the order, and they have analyzed the order, and more importantly, immigration lawyers from around the country have shared information as to how this order has affected their clients in real-world cases. I want to talk to you about those 6 scenarios in which immigration lawyers or immigrants themselves have seen their cases terminated so that they could look for relief at USCIS. The first one is that typical example that I mentioned earlier, and that is where they're trying to deport someone who has a petitioner who could sponsor them. They have someone in the United States, a green card holder or a lawful permanent resident, or some other person who might be able to sponsor them for a green card. So we're seeing termination in those scenarios. The second category is where the person has some kind of other petition with a different government agency, not necessarily USCIS, but that might allow them to not be deported. So in other words, one of the other ways that race always happened was sometimes people plead guilty to a crime in state court, and they don't know the immigration consequences of that plea. Well, then when they find themselves in deportation, sometimes the plan for the immigration lawyer to save the immigrant is to go back to the state court and get the conviction overturned or modified so that it doesn't make it a deportable offense. Well, in the old days under President Trump, they would just deport those people and not wait for that relief to run its course. Now the immigration courts are going to wait to allow the immigrant to have their day in court and to get their due process and to see if they can get that conviction set aside so that the deportation can stop. Another huge instance in which this tool has now been used is in the asylum context. So, when you come to America, if you apply for asylum, you basically have 2 shots at the apple. You get the chance of filing an asylum case with the asylum office, and then if you don't get asylum at the asylum office, then you go to the immigration court. Well, for people who are caught at the border or who entered without inspection and are put into removal proceedings, they wouldn't have the chance to make 2 claims for asylum. They'd only be able to do it in the immigration court. Well, according to this order and according to some of the cases that we've been seeing, immigrants who want to apply for asylum, who find themselves in deportation court, can ask that those proceedings be terminated so that they can raise asylum in the first instance in the asylum office. This is a huge, huge deal because asylum officers grant asylum at a much higher rate than immigration judges. So this is a good thing. And of course, it's also a good use of resources because it's going to allow the people who have the expertise in asylum to hear these cases in the first instance. And that way, if people have a legitimate claim for asylum, they're going to get a better chance at getting it approved. The fourth category that we're seeing is where someone has an approved visa petition, but there are a bunch of people in line ahead of them. So under President Trump, they were just going ahead and deporting those people. But now, if you have a approved visa and if you're waiting for your visa number to become current, the immigration courts are supposed to stop and to allow you to wait for that process to play itself out. The last 2 involve temporary protected status or people from Cuba who can adjust under the Cuban Adjustment Act. Now the immigration courts are directed to terminate and have been terminating proceedings against those classes of people. So those are the 6 categories, and we're really excited and we're really happy to share it with you. So if you're in immigration court, you probably need to be talking to your immigration lawyer, or you need to be talking to an immigration lawyer about getting out of immigration court so that you can go back to USCIS and look for the benefits that you're seeking. Some people might think this is all just politics, but at the end of the day, it's really about due process. It's really about letting the proper process run its course. It's about letting people apply for asylum where they should be applying. It's about allowing the USCIS process, which, as we know, is so delayed, to work itself out so that it's not to the detriment of the immigrant who finds themselves deported even though they have a pending application in another government agency. It just doesn't make sense. So we applaud these changes. We think it's going to help streamline things at the immigration court. It's going to allow them to focus on things that they need to focus on, and it's going to allow many, many immigrants to get relief from deportation and to seek the immigration benefits that they are deserving of. So if you have any questions, you should join me on my Immigration Answer Show. We go live 3 or 4 days a week on our Facebook group and in our YouTube channel, where I answer questions for people that aren't necessarily wanting to hire us. If you're thinking about hiring us or want to explore the possibility of working together, give us a call at 314-961-8200. You can always email us too about your case at info@hackinglawpractice.com. And as I mentioned, we have that Facebook group. That's another place where people share information, and it's called Immigrant Home. You should join us there. And you should also subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you get alerted whenever we go live or whenever we drop a new video like this one. And we'd love to have the chance to either work with you as a client or to answer your questions on our Immigration Answers show. Thanks so much and have a great day.